All right, welcome back again. We're in lecture 5, module 5, and in this one we're going to talk about some of the core concepts related to just building your business. And what I mean by that is we're going to talk a lot about the business models available to you as an entrepreneur, and we're going to use some of those things we learned from our idea validation lecture last time. We talked about the lean startup framework, about surveying, about getting feedback, about putting a minimum viable product out there to get that feedback. We're going to use those things we learn and figure out how we can best fit them in these various models. We'll talk about some old models versus new models and figure out what might be most appealing or enticing to you and your specific idea as an entrepreneur. And so those are some of the concepts we're going to cover in this lecture. And again, as always, if you have questions as we go through, feel free to reach out to me. Always ask questions. I'm more than happy to answer those. And without further ado, we'll get started. Okay, like I mentioned, we're really just going to introduce the core concepts, those business models, things that you might implement in your own experience. And we're going to look at some of the specific terms that entrepreneurs are actually using when it comes to these models and these core concepts. So again, let's jump in. If you have questions, let me know. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is a service versus a product-based business. Okay, this is relatively straightforward, right? If you're in a product business, you're actually selling something, a physical product typically. If you're in a service-based business, you're actually performing a task for your customer. You're providing some sort of service that they would benefit from. Some of the examples are, and I should say before I jump into examples, that you can be a product and a service-based business. You can have some overlap in those. Or you might just be solely product, solely service, and that's okay too. But just distinguishing these two is important as we move forward discussing the models. An example, Apple, they sell iPhones, right? That is a product-based business. They want to sell you a product for you to use. Whereas if I was a company that repaired iPhones, maybe your broken screens or your broken cameras or whatever, that is a service-based business specifically because I provide a service to people that already own a product. Okay. Now it doesn't always have to be a service for somebody that actually owns a product. It could be a service for something totally unrelated to a product, right? Maybe I go come and mow your lawn or something. Right? So that's the difference between a service versus a product-based business. Okay, let's talk just for a second specifically about software and software as a service. Back in the day, software used to be a product-based business. And some of you are probably too young to remember when you would buy Microsoft Word and you would buy it in the big cardboard box and it would have a license number related to it and you could download it on your computer and you could keep that version of Microsoft Word forever. You would never have to upgrade if you didn't want to, and you could still use the functionality of that current version of Microsoft Word, right? And that's kind of how it used to be, and that's why we say it was much like a product-based business. But now, you've seen most software companies have evolved into more of a service-based business, and what I mean by that is I can now go and buy Microsoft Word or the Microsoft Suite, but rather than paying for it one time, I pay for it every month or every year to continue to be provided that service or the service that that product provides me. And so software as a service, because we see it so much today, it's so prevalent in today's business world, you need to understand that it really has evolved from a product-based business into a service-based business where we pay a subscription fee to continue to have access to that service or to that product. Again, this is a very popular model today, so I thought it was important to bring this up specifically so that we can make that distinguishing recognition. Okay, a little bit more on service versus product. Product businesses generally are easier to grow. Now, why do I say that? Generally, product-based businesses are just easier to scale, and we'll talk about scalability a little bit later on in this lecture. But they tend to be easier to grow because they are more easily scaled. Okay? Whereas a service-based business, you can't grow without hiring more people to perform more tasks. You know, if we use our lawn mowing example, if I wanted to scale my lawn mowing business, either I have to get a lot faster at mowing lawns so I can mow more lawns in a day, or I need to hire more people to be in more than one place, right? And so that's why we say the scalability or the ease at which you can grow a business with a product versus a service is different. So just make sure you understand that distinguishing factor. Okay, what is a business model in and of itself? It's really the way that you're going to make money based off of what it is you're selling. Okay, so some examples to help explain this. Google, for example. People think, oh, Google's a free web browser where I can just go search. Well, it is that, but how is Google monetizing that? They've really created a giant advertising business where companies pay to advertise in their browser platform to be in front of eyeballs when people search for certain terms. Okay, so Google, their model is advertising. They want people to pay advertising dollars to be in front of their customers that they've collected through their web browser. Okay, Amazon, it's an e-commerce model. They want to sell products to you both from Amazon directly and also through third-party sellers, and Amazon takes a cut of that. Now, Amazon has a million different ways they make money, and we'll talk more about that. But primarily for this example, we're going to say they're an e-commerce model. They're selling products online. New York Times. What's interesting about New York Times or any newspaper or magazine nowadays is they've really had to evolve over time. Otherwise, they've usually gone by the wayside. They disappear. And so New York Times has really transitioned from, hey, here's your physical newspaper or your physical reading to, hey, come pay us online to have a subscription to see the material, read the material that we produce inside of our company. And so that could be what we call a subscription model when we talk about New York Times. Obviously, business models can be changed. You could go from an advertising model to an e-commerce, or it's from a subscription model to a one-time fee, whatever it is, right? You can change those models over time. You could add additional models to your existing business, kind of like Amazon, where you do a lot of different things all at one time. And that's okay. You just have to figure out what works, especially as you grow and expand into the future. Okay, let's talk about some of the old business models before we jump into some of the new ones. Retail first, right? This is any physical store, brick and mortar store that sells a product. Because typically they're going to hold inventory. Now, today, more and more of those are also selling the product online. But a traditional retail store is brick and mortar. They have a physical store, and they sell products. They hold inventory of those products to sell to local consumers. There are many of those now that are more brick and click, meaning they have a physical store, but they also have an online shop where consumers can go to buy the same or similar products that they would offer inside of their store. We've seen many of these retail stores go by the wayside because of the likes of Amazon and other online platforms. But we still see a lot of long-established companies that have continued to maintain physical retail space while also transitioning into online retail as well. So while it is old, there is some new aspect to it, and they're continually trying to evolve to keep up with changing technology and consumer demand. Okay, let's talk about the franchise model. Now, this is an old model. It's been around for a long time, but it's also still very much current, and there's a lot of people still doing it today and finding great success through the franchise model. And so when I say an old model, it doesn't mean it can't work today. It just means that it has been around for a while, and perhaps there's some chance for innovation or change inside of this model in the future. So franchise model, most of you probably know this, right? The owner of a restaurant or a shop paid a franchise to use the name of famous brands, right? So think of McDonald's and Subway and Chick-fil-A and whatever other franchise you want to think of, where they come in and they say, hey, I'm going to pay you a fee to use the model you've already created and that we know is going to be successful. And then as a result of that, I'm going to have a successful business, and then I'll pay you a percentage of all the money that we make in my certain locale, right? So McDonald's, I think right now to buy a franchise of McDonald's is like $1 million to get in. Plus there's a pretty extensive vetting process to make sure that the franchise owners that are applying have all their ducks in a row, and to ensure that they're going to be successful franchise owners. Chick-fil-A is much cheaper. I think it's only $10,000 or $20,000 to start a Chick-fil-A franchise. But Chick-fil-A is notorious for being really, really picky about who they choose as franchise owners. And so there's a really long interview process and review process associated with becoming a franchise owner for Chick-fil-A. Now, obviously, the benefit of going through that whole process is if you do become a Chick-fil-A franchise owner, the model is so good that it's almost guaranteed money, right? Like you can almost guarantee the success of that business because they've honed it in so well and it does so well in all the various places that they serve people. But again, you are at the mercy of a corporate company that's going to take a percentage of your earnings and ensure that you're running the business in a certain way, which is usually good because they've shown proven models that work. Okay, so that's this idea of a franchise model. Again, old, but still current and still can be very successful. In fact, some of the wealthiest people I know are serial franchise owners, meaning they've bought lots and lots of different franchises over the span of their entrepreneurial journey and done really, really well holding and owning those. Okay, now we're going to talk about some of the newer business models and why they're attractive and why they might be models that you want to implement. The on-demand business model. Now, what do we mean when we say on-demand? Think Uber and Lyft and Ship and Postmates. Anything where you can say, hey, I need this thing right now and I'm going to click my phone and it's going to come to me. That's on-demand, right? And as people in America, we're really into on-demand. We don't want to wait. We don't want to be patient. We want to have something come to us ASAP, right? And so this on-demand model has been very attractive recently, as you can see from some of the companies we list there, turn into massive businesses like Uber and Lyft, where rather than trying to flag down a taxi, we jump on our phone and say, taxi, we need you to be here at this place at this time. Boom, on demand, right? And so that's this idea of just having something when you want it, when you say you want it, as soon as possible, etc. And a lot of these are associated with mobile apps because we have the mobile phones everywhere we go, and we can get on there and command, request that demand really anytime we want. So that's this idea of the on-demand model. Okay, let's talk about another new type of model, the sharing economy. And again, this has resulted in lots of massive businesses being created because of this kind of new model that's been implemented in our world today. So when you think of sharing economy, think of companies like Airbnb. How's that sharing? Well, we can share our home or a room in our home or maybe a vacation rental we own. We can share those things with other people and they pay to have temporary lodging in those areas, right? The sharing economy has allowed us to use the things we already own, we already have, and share that with other people for a specific price. And really, that's the gist of the sharing economy, is that companies want to look for people who own things and want to share them for money, right? They're generally cheaper than normal rentals, right? Airbnb is not always now; it's evolved a little bit, but generally cheaper than renting out a 5-star hotel, for example. And then the other benefit of this is, like you see here, the power drill dilemma. Power drills, for example, are really expensive to purchase. And usually if you purchase a power drill, you're not going to use it every day or all the time, right? You just need it for a few specific tasks. So rather than buying a power drill and then underutilizing it, why don't we just go and rent a power drill and use it for a period of time and then give it back to the person that owns that thing, right? The idea of renting them out. It saves the regular consumer money and also allows for somebody that actually purchases those things to help alleviate some of the costs that are associated with these expensive items, like tools or cars or homes. Those are all part of the sharing economy, all those different industries. So that's this idea of sharing economy, where we take what we already have, we rent it for money, and allow people to use things that they wouldn't otherwise maybe buy on their own. Okay, and another new business model we're going to cover is crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing is essentially just asking people what they want to buy, and then you sell those things to them. Teespring is a good example, where people design t-shirts and other things, mugs, sweatshirts, etc., and they get voted on. So the consumer is actually telling that product creator what they like and what they don't like. Owners don't have to keep inventory, and they come up with the ideas, just print-on-demand model, right? So this is crowdsourcing idea. You can also think of any of the crowdsourcing websites. like Kickstarter, for example, where you can come up with a product or an idea or a service and put it on there, and people vote that up or vote that down and actually financially back it as well. Again, this concept of the crowd sourcing and voting for the products that they want to see in the future. So that's another new model, and a very easy model to jump into because no inventory costs, no issues finding crowds because you're going on these platforms that already have consumers ready to look at your stuff. So a really enticing new model we have today. Then we also have the freemium model, and you'll see a lot of softwares, those sorts of things that employ this freemium model, even like a Spotify, for example, where Spotify will allow you to use their platform for free and have certain limitations to that use. But if you want to go premium and you want to have all the capabilities of a certain software or service like Spotify, then you have to pay that premium fee. I put Evernote up here. If you're any of you are a user of Evernote, same thing, where you have a certain amount of storage you can use for free, certain capabilities that come with that free model. But if you want to unlock all of the power of Evernote, then you pay that premium price and be able to have access to all those different things that it can do. So this is really good, especially if you're looking for a way to bring in a bunch of new users and make the barrier of entry for those new users really low, make it easy for them to join and to try the product. And then if they like it, usually they're more likely to upgrade and pay that premium fee because they've enjoyed the free aspects of that software or that service or whatever it is. Just like an Evernote or a Spotify, like we mentioned before. So like I mentioned before, this is a really good way to get people just to try your product, to test it out, and then start to gain some dependency on it. Because if they gain dependency on it, then it's more likely for them to upgrade and pay that premium fee to be able to use it into the future with all the bells and whistles, right? And depending on what model you're using, it really doesn't cost you anything to give it away for free. I mentioned our little software, our Chrome extension software that we sell. We actually employ this same model, this freemium model, where we have a free version of it that people can jump in and use, which has allowed us to create a really big user base. And we've had many of those users that have upgraded to the premium version. We have 2 different premium versions. It's caused them to upgrade because they liked the features and the things that it's been able to do, but they want more of those features, more of those capabilities, and so they've upgraded because of that. The freemium model is really hard to do with physical products because you pay every time you make one, and so you really can't employ it very well in that kind of business, a physical product business. But most other things, this freemium model is a really nice way to approach it because, again, an easy way to create a really big user base without costing you a bunch of money doing that. The direct-to-consumer model is also becoming more prevalent, more popular today because companies are looking to cut out the middleman and sell directly to the consumer rather than lose profit cuts as they pass through middlemen. Or middlemen companies. So a couple good examples of this is like Dell computers. You can buy directly from their website. Prices are lower because they're the one manufacturing and making the product and then selling it directly to the consumer. Same thing with Warby Parker. If you've ever bought Warby Parker eyewear glasses, Warby Parker, rather than rely on the big players in the eyewear game, they decided they were going to go source their own material and create their own product and then sell directly to the consumer rather than pass it through a middleman retailer. And so Warby Parker's done a really good job being able to lower prices and sell direct to consumer with their model, which has created a really massive business for them. And this also adds a lot of convenience for the consumer in general because not only can they get lower price, but it's typically easier for them just to go directly to that source rather than be handed through a sequence of middlemen or retailers that are trying to sell you a product for an increased price. And so that's the benefit behind this direct-to-consumer model. Okay, let's talk now a little bit about scalability and why it is important as it relates to these business models we've discussed. If you remember at the very beginning of this lecture, I mentioned the fact that certain businesses are more scalable than others. And this is an important question to ask yourself when you start to go through this entrepreneurial journey ask yourself the question, is the business I'm trying to get into, is it easily scalable or is it not? Now, maybe you're not worried about scalability and you don't care if your business grows and expands in a significant way. But for most people, they want to know that scalability is part of the features inside of their business, because if you can't scale really well, it's really difficult to make money, and it's really difficult to grow and difficult to expand your customer base. So the scalability needs to be there. Now, let's talk more about scalability. As far as a side business, if you're doing a side hustle and you're just trying to make a little extra income, you're really not very concerned with the idea of scalability. You're just there to use your extra time to make a little extra money. If you're a lifestyle entrepreneur, like we talked about before in previous lecture, you probably have a medium concern with that. You need some scalability, but you're not worried about scaling into something gigantic. And then startups obviously are on the other end of the spectrum. They're super concerned with scalability. They want to be able to expand and grow in a really, really significant way. And so the startup founders are usually only focusing on ideas that have significant scalability and can grow in a really significant way. Now, obviously with scalability, if you can't scale past a certain point, grow and expand past a certain point, that means you have a limit for your business, right? There's only so much you can do, so much growth that can happen. But every time you grow, you have a new set of problems to deal with. And so it's a bit of a catch-22 in the fact that, yes, you want to have forever scalability if possible, but also understand that as you scale, as you grow, as you expand as a business, there's going to be more and more problems that arise that you'll have to deal with and figure out along the way. Now, that's part of the process of entrepreneurship, and that's the part I think is fun about it, is taking the problems and trying to solve them. But it's also one of the headaches, too, that comes with it, that as you scale, as you grow, new problems will arise, and you'll have to be innovative and creative in the way that you come up with solutions for those problems. So you're probably asking the question, how do we actually know if my business is scalable, right? Now, one of the main questions I usually ask people is, does your business have a lot of marginal costs? How much does it cost you to make and deliver a product? Okay, because if it has a lot of marginal costs, it may be difficult to try and scale. And what I mean by that is, if you're creating a widget and it costs X amount of money to create 10 widgets, when you scale and make 100 widgets instead of 10, is that same cost per widget staying consistent as you grow and the price growing with that expansion? Or can you make 100 widgets 20% cheaper than you can 10? Because if you can, then the scalability is there. You can have real scalability and grow in a significant way when those marginal costs are not as high. If you visit the link here, I won't go to the link here during the presentation, but if you visit the link, there's a great Investopedia link that discusses marginal costs and how it affects scalability and how it affects the way a business is going to grow. But that's really the question you have to ask yourself when we look at scalability is, how much marginal cost do we have? Is it great? Is it low? Can it be reduced as we scale and produce more, or can it not? And that's really what you need to ask yourself when we talk about scalability. Okay, so let's end with just a few examples of scalability and what that means, and we can see the difference between a business that's scalable and one that's not. Our first one here is selling paintings. So let's say you're a talented artist and you create paintings, one-off paintings, to sell to people. Now, while that skill can be super valuable, and pieces can be really expensive, especially if you're a dead artist and your art's been around for hundreds of years, those can be really expensive. But it's really hard to scale, right? You can't clone yourself to make more pictures every day, make more paintings, more art every day. And so the idea of selling paintings has a really low score as far as scalability goes. It's just not a very scalable business. What about medicine for a certain disease? Now, it could be scalable depending on how prevalent the disease is, but typically it's hard to scale because there's only a fixed amount of people who need that particular medicine, especially if it's a really rare kind of disease, right? Now, if it's really rampant and it's everywhere and it's a disease that lots of people deal with, then maybe your medicine is scalable to a certain degree because we have 7 billion people in the world, right? But understand that typically something like that that's really specific for a specific purpose is harder to scale because there's a limit to the number of people you can actually sell it to. Okay, and then an online course, right? I use this example all the time because I think it's a great example of a lot of these things we discussed, but especially a great example of scalability. Reason I say that is because you can make an online course and build it one time, and then you can sell it forever into the future. All it takes is just finding more and more people to buy it, right? And you don't have to recreate it. It doesn't cost you more money to sell 100 than it does one. You've put in that work initially, and it's something you can sell over and over and over and over and over again. And becomes very easy to scale because you have very minimal marginal costs. Okay, this is the same with SaaS. A lot of SaaS companies that have that, marginal cost tends to decrease over time, and it's easy for them to sell more and more and more of it at a decreased cost to them. And really the challenge comes down to how can we find more people to buy? And that's the idea behind scalability. So we've reviewed a few things: old business models, new business models, and the fact that scalability needs to be incorporated in whatever model you choose. And again, if you have questions about any aspect of the lecture, please let me know. And then if you haven't covered this week's business challenge, be sure to go and watch the business challenge lecture and complete the worksheet associated with that. And also make sure you take care of the speaker series portion of this class, both the quiz and the reflections, to make sure you're getting full credit and getting the most you can out of this class. Like I said, we want to spend a lot of time going through the theory and the concepts and the topics of entrepreneurship, but we also want to spend a lot of time practicing these things. And that's what the business challenge is there for. That's what speaker series is there for, so we can learn real life skills that we can go and apply and utilize, and then hopefully benefit our own business and our own ventures as we move forward. Okay, again, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for sticking through this lecture, and we'll talk again soon.